Hello, everybody, and welcome into another edition of What's the Word? Today is Friday, July 3rd, 2020, and there are two sources of word today. The first coming from Proverbs 16:3, which says, "Commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will succeed if you respond to His will and guidance." The second coming from Colossians 3, verse 23, which reads, "Whatever you do, whatever your task may be, work from your soul as something done for the Lord and not for men." I think a lot of the time, people become discouraged when they see other people's successes because they want their timeline of success to look the same. But this goes to say that comparison is the thief of joy. Starting off on a bit of a sad note, former Washington offensive line coach Joe Bugle passed away on June 28th at the age of 80. Bugle held the position with the team from 1981 to 1989, then again from 2004 to 2009, and won 2 Super Bowls with the team as the coach of the offensive line that garnered the name the Hogs. Sticking with the theme of the team in Washington, 87 investment firms and shareholders worth approximately $620 billion penned a letter asking Nike, FedEx, and Pepsi to end business relations with the team unless they changed their name. After this, FedEx, the company which holds the naming rights for the team's stadium, formally requested that the team change its name. Following suit, Nike, the NFL's uniform manufacturer, removed all team merchandise from its website. A little bit of background on the name. The team has carried the name since 1937 when it moved from Massachusetts when it was known as the Boston Braves. This isn't the first time that controversy has surrounded the name, but back in 2013, in an interview with USA Today, team owner Daniel Snyder said, quote, "We'll never change the name. It's that simple. Never. You can use caps." As all the outcry has come about to change the name, Stephen A. Smith on ESPN's First Take made a really good point, saying that the owner would only change the name under financial reasons, not because of the current climate. And if you ask me, $620 billion is definitely enough financial reasoning. But I want to take this time to kind of warn you guys that a lot of the companies you see now being vocally supportive of Black Lives Matter and other fights against racial injustices are only doing so because not doing it would affect their bottom line. Stephen A. had a really good quote. It said that this is about dollars and cents, not sentiments and sensitivities. But as pressure increases publicly, the team announced today that they will undergo a thorough review of the team's name. In the statement, team owner Daniel Snyder said, "This process allows the team to take into account not only the proud tradition and history of the franchise, but also input from our alumni, the organization, sponsors, the National Football League, and the local community it is proud to represent on and off the field." Hopefully a name change will come soon. I think Daniel Snyder kind of misses the point that this doesn't proudly represent a community. It's a derogatory slur, and the NFL, in part with Roger Goodell, said they are supportive with the team taking the steps to change its name. Wrapping up the portion on the National Football League, the league announced that it will cut its preseason in half, going from 4 games to 2. This is the first semblance that the season itself is somewhat impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, amongst the civil unrest, the league says it plans to play the Black national anthem before its Week 1 games, that being "Lift Every Voice and Sing." I don't know about you, but I didn't know that was the quote-unquote Black national anthem. And for me, even if they do play it, that doesn't move the needle to me. This is among the pandering moves that a lot of corporations are taking to appease us instead of giving us what we actually are asking for: racial equality. But moving on to the MLB, the reigning World Series champion Washington Nationals will reportedly play host to the New York Yankees on opening day on July 23rd. The Bronx Bombers, as they are known, were the runner-ups for the AL pennant, losing out to the Astros, who of course were beaten by the Nationals for the World Series. Heading into the 2020 season, the Yankees are co-favorites to win this year's World Series, tied with the Dodgers. Meanwhile, the Nationals are sixth in those odds, falling behind the Houston Astros, the Atlanta Braves, and the Minnesota Twins. For the Nationals this season, they will be without first baseman Ryan Zimmerman and right-handed pitcher Joe Ross, as the both of them have opted out of the season. Ryan Zimmerman released a statement saying that after a great deal of thought and given my family's circumstances, 3 young children including a newborn, and a mother at high risk, I have decided not to participate in the 2020 season. He went on to say, "To be clear, I am not retiring at this time. I have not decided on my future in baseball past 2020, but this year I'll be staying safe at home and pulling as hard as anyone for the guys to defend our championship." A little bit of background: Ryan Zimmerman's mom has multiple sclerosis, a cause that his foundation, ZIMS, raises awareness for. And as far as Joe Ross, he was expected to be among the competition for the team's 5th starter, but with both of Joe Ross's parents in the medical field, that probably played a factor in his decision. Moving on, Major League Soccer announced its schedule for the MLS is Back tournament group stage. D.C. United will serve as the road team for 2 of its games, with the first of those taking place next Friday, July 10th, against Toronto FC at 8 p.m. on ESPN. Their second game will take place on Thursday, July 16th, also at 8 p.m. against the New England Revolution on FS1. And their final game will take place on Thursday, July 21st at 10:30 p.m. against the Montreal Impact. As I mentioned before, DC United can make it into the knockout stage, but MLS has kind of tweaked their qualifications by saying that the top 2 teams from Group A, which has 5 total teams, while the other groups have 4 total teams, the top 2 teams from that group will make it into the knockout round, while the 3 best third place finishers throughout the league will make up the other teams. Initially, it was the top team from every group and the top 4 third place finishers, but the league made this tweak saying that Group A had 5 teams while every other group had 4, Sticking with schedule revelations, the NBA announced its 8-game seeding schedule for the bubble in Orlando. For the Wizards, there's a slight change to what their believed schedule would be. Initially, both the Bucks and Celtics appeared twice on their schedule, but the NBA opted to avoid that, filling their new schedule with the New Orleans Pelicans and the Phoenix Suns. An interesting tidbit that came out of the schedule release is that all teams have a to-be-determined time for their final game. This points to the idea that the NBA will probably look to have all of its games end at the same time so no team has a competitive advantage. Looking at the Wizards' schedule, they currently sit 5.5 games behind the Orlando Magic for the 8th seed and 6 games behind the Brooklyn Nets for the 7th seed. They'd have to be within 4 games to force a play-in for the playoffs, which means they'd have to win at least 2 more games than either of those teams. I went ahead and looked at the schedules for the other teams, and I think that they stand the best chance of knocking off the Nets for their seed. The Nets roster will be without Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Wilson Chandler, DeAndre Jordan, and likely Spencer Dinwiddie. Their schedule consists of Orlando twice, followed by the Wizards, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Kings, the Clippers, and Portland. So I went ahead and tried to find out what their win-loss schedule would be, that being the Brooklyn Nets. I think they'll probably split with Orlando, so that's 1 win. I'm betting on the Wizards to win, and I think the Bucks will beat the Nets. I think the Celtics will beat the Nets. I think the Nets stand a good chance of beating Sacramento, so that's 2 wins. And then I think they'll lose to the Clippers and lose to Portland. With that being said, and the Wizards only having to win 2 more games in them, let's take a look at the Wizards' schedule. I think they can possibly beat Phoenix. Phoenix has a young, athletic roster. They have Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. But I think that the Wizards could pull that one off. Followed by the Nets, which is another win I think they can take. And then they play the Pacers. I think that's a toss-up game. They'll probably end up losing that one. Then they'll lose to the Sixers. I think they can beat the Pelicans. Don't quote me on that one. I know you guys are probably looking at me kind of crazy. I know they have Lonzo Ball. I know they have Brandon Ingram and Zion. But I think the Wizards could actually pull that one off. So that's 3 wins there. And then they face the Thunder, another team that's currently sitting in playoff positioning in the West. Actually, they're locked into their playoff positioning. But I think they could beat the Thunder. Call me crazy, but I think they could do it. They have Chris Paul, they have Shai Gilgeous, and they have Steven Adams, but I think the Wizards match up fairly decently. So I think they could win that one. That's 4 wins right there. So already 2 more than what I projected the Nets to win. But then the Wizards will lose to the Bucks and they'll lose to the Celtics. I mentioned that toss-up game between the Pacers. So if they win that, that's 5 games. And they'd only have to win 2 more than the Nets. So they could possibly make the playoffs in that scenario. But a little bit more on the Wizards' chances. As I mentioned last week, Davis Bertans opted out. And this week, Bradley Beal said that his playing status is still undetermined and that his decision falls mostly on the hand of the medical team and the doctors. Rosters were due on Wednesday, July 1st, but the league seems to be kind of lax on that, obviously understanding that players will make their decision as time goes on. That being said, if Brad doesn't play, I don't think they stand a chance of making the playoffs. Even if they did make the playoffs, I don't think they stand a chance of making it far, as they'd probably play the Bucks in the first round. But my analysis on their playoff chances, as a fan of the team, I would love to see them compete for the playoffs. As a fan of knowing that they need to rebuild/retool, I think it would be best for them to miss the playoffs and grab that lottery pick. A healthy John Wall, a healthy Brad Beal, a second-year Rui Hachimura, and a lottery pick could definitely turn around the fortunes of this team much faster than making it into the playoffs and getting swept in the first round. But Sticking with basketball, something really cool that happened in the world of the sport. Five-star basketball prospect McCord Maker announced his decision to commit to Howard over the likes of UCLA and Kentucky. Maker becomes the highest-ranking recruit to commit to an HBCU since ESPN started their database in 2007. Hopefully, this commitment to a historically black university opens the pathway for other players like him to do the same and shift power to the people. But wrapping up the episode, Washington, D.C. put in its bid to help host the World Cup when it comes to North America in 2026. I thought that was pretty cool. It's a bid for the continent as a whole, so it wouldn't just be in Washington. But I think Washington has the infrastructure to help host that bid. Obviously, they have Audi Field, which opened up in 2018. And they have the site of RFK, which likely will be remodeled to suit the new team, the new NFL team in Washington after they have a rebrand. Obviously, they cannot move into that stadium until they change the name. But once they do change the name, which I think is likely, they will likely start rebuilding on that site of RFK, and that can be used towards hosting the World Cup. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another edition of What's the Word? God bless.